All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. The show is about to begin. My name is David McKnight, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts. I'm the august, you can see how august I am, august director of the Annenberg Rare Book and Manuscript Library, which is part of the Kislak Center. Today, we have been a great day, actually. We have celebrated the third annual symposium of a nascent group in Philadelphia that is focused on the study of the avant-garde and its history, its present, and future in Philadelphia. And the name of that group is the Philadelphia Avant-Garde Studies Consortium. And today's symposium's title was Apolitical My Ars, Dissent, Resistance, and Revolution in the Avant-Garde Arts. And you can imagine who might have inspired this. I'll say no more. And as we've had illustrated today on a number of great talks, that the avant-garde politics and reaction and response is alive and well, whether it's in subway art or whether it's in the Twitter sphere. So, as part of our program, we decided, or we opted for and took the opportunity to provide our good friend, Randall Couch, who is also a colleague of mine here at the University of Pennsylvania, with the opportunity to launch PEAL. A year ago at our symposium, Randall gave us a soupçon, a taste of what the beautiful book that's on sale just on the other side of the partition behind us in front of the elevators, and the beautiful broadside that's associated with it. I'm not making any money from this. I'm just merely promoting the fact that this beautiful book and broadside is available for sale. Randall Couch edited and translated Mad Woman, the Locus Mueres poems of Gabrielle Mistral, which won the UK Poetry Society's biennial Popescu Prize for Poetry Translation, and was one of the two finalists for the PEN American Award for Poetry in Translation, and was named one of the top 10 poetry books of the decade by the London Review Bookshop. No small feat. His own poems and critical essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. A founding member of PEN's Kelly Writers House, he has appeared frequently on Poem Talk podcast, co-sponsored by the Poetry Foundation. Following a 10-year career as an art conservator at the University of Texas and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, he now serves on the professional staff at Penn and teaches poetry and poetics at Arcadia University. It's my great pleasure to introduce Randall Couch this evening.
Thank you, David. Thanks to the Kislak Center, to Ask, to Eric Weinstein, and to Jack Rankin for videography this evening. Thanks to all of you for joining us for what I hope will be a bit of serious fun. So let's start with some background to this project. Most people associate composition using mathematical constraint with avant-gardes, which is why we're associated. People like Schoenberg or Cage in music, Raymond Queneau and the French Oulipo group in literature. Yet for more than 400 years, a tradition of algorithmic composition has flourished in the art of change ringing, the practice used in the English-speaking world to sound sets of free-swinging bells in church and chapel towers. Fixed patterns called methods modulate the order of the pealing bells, each with its own musical character and colorful name. Change ringing bells are set in motion by individual slack ropes and pulleys. Because the motion of the heavy bells, usually tuned to a diatonic scale, can't be started or stopped quickly, bands of ringers lack the ability to change intervals with the melodic freedom of other instruments. Once the bells are sounding in series, called rows, any given bell can only trade places with an adjacent bell. Within this rigorous constraint, ringers have invented thousands of methods based on selected permutations of the row. And I should say here that in addition to method ringing, which I just described, the changes to each row can also be called out one at a time by a conductor, a bit like calling an American square dance. But that's often an improvised or nonce practice rather than a continuously changing pattern generated by codified algorithms that can be learned. So let's listen to a sample. I'm going to play a 1 minute and a bit recording of a practice on 10 of the bells of the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St. Peter in York, better known as York Minster. It begins with several repeated descending scales called rounds. Then you'll hear a man call out, "Playing Bob," to begin the method called Playing Bob. And the bells will begin to shift order as they move through the pattern. Some of you might have heard that a full peal of 3 hours and 20 minutes was rung at Westminster Abbey on Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's 70th wedding anniversary just a little while ago on November 20th, which included 5,070 rows or changes, all rung from memory. The first known publication on change ringing was by Fabian Stedman and Richard Duckworth in 1668, although the art was already well developed by then. Here on the right from the same book is an early method diagram stipulating the patterns of permutations in the rows. Here's a modern method diagram, and by convention, the heaviest working bell traces the so-called blue line, while the treble bell's path is often traced in red. Reading these diagrams is part of how ringers learn methods. So one evening, I was walking by St. Martin in the Fields Church in Chestnut Hill, not far from where I live, while change ringers were practicing. As I listened, I ruminated on the sound. It was an algorithmically generated sequence of tones, therefore a time series. If melody was a sequence, or is a sequence of tones in time, then the methods of change ringing were a specific kind of melody. Were they music or just a joyful noise? So this is all background context for my project. And here is the analogy that generated the book and that PEAL enacts. Melody is one important carrier of musical meaning, just as syntax is one important component of linguistic meaning. If you manipulate either, you change the meaning. The more I thought about this analogy, the more its implications ramified. The role of math in the production and sensation of tone, described by scientists from Archimedes to Helmholtz to Nyquist, is to model physical nature. The structures of tones that constitute music are culture, and the conventions that define the boundary between noise and music evolve. They have a cultural history. Likewise, numbers are bound up both in the physical formation of speech and the long history of poetry, both as heightened speech and as an art of concepts. So I decided to create a cento, quoting lines composed during the 400-year history of change ringing, and each line would have between 4 and 9 non-repeating words. And then I would make the analogy literal by applying a different change ringing method to permute each line to create a composition, a poem or a piece of text art. Like a good Oulipian, I would build the maze from which I had to escape. Like a good conceptualist, I would build the maze by translating an idea from one domain to another. And as a poet, I would catalyze thematic implications of music, noise, silence, number, syntax, computation, and emotion through the choice and juxtaposition of the starting lines in the cento. Unlike some strict conceptual art, PEAL is intended to reward both intellectual reflection and visual perception. Merely recognizing the concept shouldn't exhaust it. As Donald Judd said about the aesthetic effect of Jackson Pollock's drip paintings, quote, "It's that sensation, completely immediate and specific, and nothing modifies it." Well, since I just invoked Jackson Pollock, who was famous for his process of action painting, I'm sort of obliged to talk about my process for making PEAL. Maybe this is the sort of special features part of the box set. I used a ringing simulator program called Mabel, which you're looking at here, to gain access to the tens of thousands of methods recognized by the UK-based Central Council of Ringers, and to export blue line method diagrams as editable text. Next, I commissioned a programmer colleague, Chris Heiser, who's here tonight, to code a simple substitution app that allowed me to permute any of the cento's lines according to any given method and see the results. That way I could select from among the huge number of methods defined for a given number of bells, or words. I'm grateful to Bruce Butler, the ringing master of the Philadelphia Guild of Change Ringers, who's here tonight, for helpful suggestions at this stage of things. Once I had chosen a method for each line, I used a word processor's search and replace function to apply color to the words corresponding to the blue line and red line positions, adjust capitalization, and so on. So this is the point at which I shared samples of the work at last year's PASC symposium. At this spring's Philadelphia Art Book Fair, I was reminded of the English poet and publisher Simon Cutts and his Coracle Press, whose work I had first encountered at a 2008 exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London called Certain Trees, the Constructed Book, Poem, and Object, 1964 to 2006, for which he also co-authored the catalog. Cutts and the poets associated with that exhibition, including Ian Hamilton Findlay, Erica Van Horn, Stuart Mills, Colin Sackett, and others, share a sense that poetic making extends to the complete form of the finished work. In the words of Ulysses Carrion, quote, "In order to read, one must apprehend the book as a structure." But the form of the work can also extend to text objects in the world, such as this work by Cutts entitled History of the Airfields of Lincolnshire. And before I display this, I'll just mention many of you probably know that because of its flat terrain, Lincolnshire was the site of many airfields built during the Second World War for Allied bombers and support aircraft to fly sorties over Europe. So here, Cutts has erected weathered slices of abandoned World War II runways along a road in Lincolnshire and attached a line of red painted metal letters that simply repeats the word poppies. So you can see in this group's practice elements of concrete poetry, literally concrete in this example, conceptual art, arte povera, installation art, and artist books, making no distinctions of genre. Well, I'd never met Simon, but it struck me that he might get PEAL. So in May, I sent him a query along with a PDF of the draft, and he responded with enthusiasm almost immediately. And by October, I received from Coracle the first copy of the edition of 300, which are now on this table, with typography by Colin Sackett. In addition, the University of Connecticut's Counterproof Press has created a letterpress broadside that David mentioned earlier of one of the poems from the book. And we have 25 of those available as well. I had always envisioned, remembering this concept of the poem as completed form, that PEAL could take three forms, the first of which would be a book, and one of which would be a polyvocal performance to restore the dimensions of sound and audible time. And I'm delighted to say that Sandra Bain Cushman, founder of Orchestral Maneuvers, approached me even before I knew PEAL would be published to use some of the compositions in her work with groups in the US and around the world. And she's done just that. So I will now read the opening cento from PEAL, after which Sandra and Orchestral Maneuvers will take things from there. Church bells beyond the stars heard, ring right out our sordid, turbid time. I like not tears in tune, but most by numbers judge a poet's song. All art constantly aspires towards the condition of music. Noise is any pattern we don't understand. Today I respect structure, the antithesis of conceit. Noise carries order within itself. Melodies or 12-tone rows don't just happen. Music is either sound or silence. Every something is an echo of nothing. Events are perceivable, but time is not. Money is what words are, and every bell is a wit's commonwealth. Every text is a cento. The fault of one bell spoils a ring. Melodic motion is change of pitch in time. The digital computer is a syntactical machine. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Machines take me by surprise with great frequency. Yet the ear it fully knows. There is in souls a sympathy with sounds. The dull mind rises to truth through material things. Sound becomes visible in the form of radiance. Everybody has their taste in noises. To drink in notes and numbers, oh, I am restless as dice. I think art is the most chancy thing. Chance favors the prepared mind. All statistics have outliers. Through untraced ways and airy paths I fly, and music shall untune the sky.
Church bells beyond.
The
Stars.
Heard.
Beyond church bells.
Stars.
the
Heard.
Beyond
Stars.
church bells.
Heard.
the
Beyond
Stars.
Heard.
church bells.
the
Beyond
Stars.
Heard.
the
church bells.
Stars.
Beyond
Heard.
the
church bells.
Stars.
Beyond
Heard.
church bells.
the
Stars.
Beyond church bells.
Heard.
the
Stars.
Church bells. Beyond
the
Heard.
church bells.
Stars.
the
Beyond
Heard.
church bells.
the
Stars.
Heard.
Beyond
the
church bells.
Heard.
Stars.
Beyond
the
Heard.
church bells. Beyond
Stars.
the
Heard.
beyond church bells.
Stars.
the
Heard.
Beyond
Stars.
church bells.
Heard.
the
Beyond
Stars.
church bells.
Heard.
the
Beyond church bells.
Stars.
Heard.
the
Church bells. Beyond
Stars.
Heard.
church bells.
the
Stars.
Beyond church bells.
Heard.
Stars.
the
Beyond church bells.
Stars.
Heard.
Beyond
the
Stars.
church bells. Beyond
Heard.
the,
stars,
beyond church bells,
the,
heard,
stars,
beyond
the,
church bells,
heard,
stars,
beyond
the,
heard,
church bells, beyond
stars,
the,
heard,
church bells, beyond
stars,
the,
church bells,
heard,
beyond
stars,
church bells,
the,
heard,
beyond church bells,
stars,
heard,
the,
church bells, beyond
heard,
stars,
the,
church bells,
heard,
beyond
the,
stars,
heard,
church bells,
the,
beyond
stars,
heard,
the,
church bells,
stars,
beyond
heard,
the,
stars,
church bells, beyond
heard,
the,
stars,
beyond church bells,
the,
heard,
stars,
beyond church bells,
the,
heard,
stars,
church bells, beyond
the,
heard,
church bells,
stars,
beyond
the,
church bells,
heard,
beyond
stars,
church bells,
the,
beyond
heard,
stars,
church bells, beyond
the,
stars.
heard.
events
are,
perceivable,
but,
Time,
is,
Not,
are,
events
but,
perceivable,
is,
time,
not,
are, but,
events
is,
perceivable,
not,
time,
but, are, is,
events
not,
perceivable,
time,
but, is, are,
not,
events
time,
perceivable,
is, but,
not,
are,
time,
events perceivable,
is,
not,
but,
time,
are,
perceivable, events
not,
is,
time,
but,
perceivable,
are,
events
not,
time,
is,
perceivable,
but,
events
are,
time,
not,
perceivable,
is,
events
but, are,
time,
perceivable,
not,
events
is, are, but,
perceivable,
time,
events
not,
are, is, but,
perceivable, events
time,
are,
not,
but, is,
events perceivable,
are,
time,
but,
not,
is,
events
are,
perceivable,
but,
time.
is,
not.
Randall told you a lot, but what he didn't tell you is we didn't just run into each other and talk about this. Randall is a connoisseur of shape, sound, syntax, and wine, especially Spanish wine. So when you go out to dinner with Randall and Claire, 4 people, before the food even gets to the table, there's a bottle of white and a bottle of red. Always fantastic. We were on to the bottle of red when the union between Randall's PEAL project and orchestral maneuvers was consummated, or at least it began, consummated tonight. And Randall was still looking for a publisher, and it came out in our conversation that he was also looking for a way to deliver the poems to you, the audience, and that simply reading these is hard. They're heavy seas in terms of rhythm and meaning. And orchestral maneuvers is always looking for a way to bring the work of a group of guitarists over the last 33 years in North America, South America, and Europe, led by a man named Robert Fripp, which also use algorithmic kinds of forms and certain philosophies in their group work. We were looking to bring that to a wider audience, as in people who don't play guitar. So in our live group here tonight, we have only 2 guitarists, Brady and Tucker, both play. And then we have Laura, Kathy, Lisa, and Thea, we've all grouped together, and we're the new phase of this guitar circle, guitar craft work. The old phase of it will be represented not in the next piece, but in the piece after that. And it's a group of people from around the world, 6 different countries, all guitarists. And we actually used the guitar. We did our work online. We used the Zoom app. And we all got together once a week. Well, this project was going on since August, and we played different rhythms with the Zoom app, and we came up with a little movie that you'll see about 3 minutes long. Finally, the basis of orchestral maneuvers is something called the Alexander technique. Does anybody know what it is? Do you want to say what it is?
Me?
Yeah, what would you say?
I've just used it when I've had back pain.
Okay. Yeah, it's useful. So what does it do, would you say? I'm putting you on the spot. Somebody else can bail her out.
Yeah.
Restores balance.
Yes! Yay! Restores balance. Good. What else? Yeah. It trains, yeah.
Dancers use it for stretching, exercising, limbering up.
And learning how to move with a greater awareness in the body and also in groups with each other. Because we're all sort of fixated on screens these days. It actually teaches us simply to look around. And if we weren't doing that, we'd be banging into each other up here. One of the fellows in our online group, his mother's been a change ringer in the UK for 61 years. We've all been change ringing since August. So we do not have plain Bob minor memorized. We actually call, in our own little avant-garde language, we call each line, and we've named the lines. So for our next piece, not to pick on the same people, I'd like 4 people to volunteer to call our next piece for us. We actually need your help. So we need someone here. And I know there are 4 people here who can do it because they've done it before. So in a pinch, they'll come up. But let's have some new people. Anybody? Randall, even. Come. There, for instance. Yay. All right, so bear with us. These are silly names. But they work for us. Yeah, it's going to be a weird piece with only 2 lines. You got to behave yourselves, guys, all right? Okay. So I think you may have called this one before, you may not have. You'll be cycling. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You'll keep going like that, over and over. So you'll need to look at Steve and pass when you're done. Okay. What's your name?
Eric.
Eric, I'm saying. I know all of you. Okay. 7 stick. You're always one. No, you're not. You're not. Double latte. Double latte is short for double late tail switch. And if anybody at the end of this can tell us what that is from watching, you're going to get a prize. Okay? So 7 stick, double latte, 7 stick. So you and Steve are the same. 1 stick. So let's practice. Do 3 of those, please.
7 stick. Double latte.
7 stick.
1 stick.
And you do it at the end of our first line. Steve will say it. At the end of our second line, Tom. Third line, Claire. Eric, let me begin again. Okay? And if we mess up, it's their fault. The next piece is, I hope it's the right one. I believe it's noise. Yeah!
Noise.
Is.
Any pattern.
Don't.
Understand. 7 stick.
Is.
Noise.
Pattern. Any.
Don't.
Understand. Double latte.
Is.
Noise.
Any pattern.
Don't.
Understand.
7 stick. Noise.
Is.
Pattern. Any.
Don't.
Understand. 1 stick.
Noise.
Pattern.
Is. Don't.
Any.
Understand. 7 stick.
Pattern.
Noise.
Don't. Is.
Understand.
Any.
Double latte.
Pattern.
Noise.
Is. Don't.
Any.
Understand.
7 stick. Noise.
Pattern.
Don't. Is.
Understand.
Any.
1 stick.
Noise.
Don't.
Pattern.
Understand.
Is.
Any.
7 stick.
Don't.
Noise.
Understand.
Pattern.
Is.
Any.
Double latte.
Don't.
Noise.
Pattern.
Understand.
Is.
Any. 7 stick.
Noise.
Don't.
Understand.
Pattern.
Is.
Any.
1 stick.
Noise.
Understand.
Don't.
Pattern.
Any.
Is.
7 stick. Understand.
Noise.
Don't.
Any.
Pattern.
Is.
Double latte. Understand.
Noise.
Don't.
Pattern.
Any.
Is.
7 stick.
Noise.
Understand.
Don't.
Any.
Pattern.
Is.
1 stick.
Noise.
Understand.
Any.
Don't. Is.
Pattern.
7 stick.
Noise.
Any.
Understand.
Is. Don't.
Pattern.
Double latte.
Noise.
Understand.
Any.
Don't. Is.
Pattern.
7 stick.
Noise.
Any.
Understand.
Is. Don't.
Pattern.
1 stick.
Noise.
Any.
Is.
Understand.
Pattern.
Don't.
7 stick.
Any.
Noise.
Is.
Pattern.
Understand.
Don't.
Double latte.
Any.
Noise.
Is.
Understand.
Pattern.
Don't.
7 stick.
Noise.
Any.
Is.
Pattern.
Understand.
Don't.
1 stick.
Noise.
Is.
Any.
Pattern.
Don't.
Understand.
There
is
in
souls
A. Sympathy with
sounds
is
there
souls
in
sympathy. A.
sounds
With
is
souls
there
sympathy.
in
sounds
A. With
souls
is
sympathy.
there
sounds
in
With A.
souls
Sympathy.
is
sounds
there
With
in
A. Sympathy.
souls sounds
is
With
there
A.
in
Sympathy.
sounds souls
With
is
A.
there in
sounds
Sympathy. With
souls
A.
is
in there
sounds
With sympathy. A.
souls
in
is
there
With
sounds
A. Sympathy.
in
souls
there
is
With A.
sounds
in
Sympathy.
there
souls
is
A. With
in
sounds
there
sympathy.
is
souls
A.
in
With
there
sounds
is
sympathy.
souls
in
A.
there
With
is
sounds souls
sympathy.
in there
A.
is
With
souls sounds
sympathy.
there in
is
A.
souls
With sympathy.
sounds
there
is
in
souls
A. Sympathy. With
sounds. Einer jeden Seele wohnt inne der Hang zum Klang.
there is in souls a sympathy with sounds.
Il y a dans les âmes une sympathie avec le son.
C'è nell'anima una simpatia con il suono.
Es gibt in Seelen ein Mitschwingen mit Klängen.
er is in zielen een verbondenheid met geluid.
Every text
is
a
center.
text.
every A is
Center.
Text.
A
Every
Center.
is A
text.
Center.
every is A
Center.
Text.
is every
Center.
A is
Text.
every
Center.
is
A
every
text.
is
Center.
every A
Text.
is every
Center.
Text.
A every is
Text.
Center.
A every
Text.
is A
Center.
Orchestral maneuvers. We have a few minutes if anyone has questions, or we can immediately bolt for the wine.
Randall, it's really been a wonderful experience, and of course you and I have talked about this over dinner some months ago. As I'm watching the performance tonight, I find myself, especially when I was listening to that line in Italian, which was so beautiful, you know, about in ogni anima, and so forth and so on. The relationship between English as an essentially analytical language, where word order is so important to syntax, and Latin, for example, where it's the form of the word, such that you can rearrange the order of the words within a line, as Catullus does in his poetry, for example, and achieve all kinds of marvelous tonal effects, rhythmic effects. And of course, you could speak for Spanish, I can speak for Italian in this regard. Italian still has, indeed, some of that flexibility in its word order left over from Latin. I don't think French has nearly so much of it. But I found myself, as I was watching the permutation, because invariably it was a simple change of one position of each of the persons. Mm-hmm. And so can you say something about the sort of underlying thoughts you had about syntax and its relationship to meaning as you were doing this project that would bear on this question of the difference between a synthetic language like English and the analytical forebears that produced our language way back when?
Well, not to be flip, but the simple answer is that's why I didn't write it in a different language. But the fact that English is a weakly inflected language and does depend so heavily on word order is what, as I was wandering by the Church of St. Martin's, was running through my head, that the idea of constraint exists both there and in the patterns of change ringing. And the constraint that you mentioned of only exchanging one place was taken directly from the change ringing methods. That was not a quality that I arbitrarily chose or took from English. So what interests me there are many ways to theorize this. People have asked me how to read this. There are many ways to read it. I would say the first one is to appreciate it as a visual pattern. Almost any one of the lines can suggest the generation of a lot of theoretical questions if you apply that to looking at the text. But the principal things that intrigued me at the beginning were the idea of constraint, creating visual patterns, and at the same time generating semantic surprises. So many of the lines, once you permute them, are nonsense in English, but they will have within them meaningful phrases because of the way the pattern forces the words to conjoin. And so because English is a weakly inflected language and word order makes a difference, you see those patterns in a way that you probably wouldn't if this same exercise were done in, say, Spanish or certainly Latin, right, to your point. So I guess the the analogy would be weaker, if not completely inapt, in a strongly inflected language. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, Randall, I mean, you took us through, you said the process, and you showed you got the computer program and the people to help you and so on, and it all sounded so rational and easy in that way, but there must have been a moment where you thought, is this going to work? Is this going to make any sense? And then you must have been, at some point, enchanted by the discovery of what you were seeing. How does that work?
Well, yeah, I was definitely enchanted by the project, which sort of motivated me to keep on because it's one of the stranger things I've ever done. But there is a lot of constrained process, but there are also many places involving artistic choice and decisions. The selection of the lines in the cinto, for example, as I explored lines that were between 4 and 9 words long that had non-repeating words in them, and I wanted to, I began thinking about bells, of course. Then I thought this would be really boring if this was just a kind of literal poem about bells. And then I began to think about the principles of construction, which led me to think about melody, time series, and so on. And so as I looked for lines, I would find citations of other works that intrigued me, and then I would go look at those, and they would have, so it's, like any good scholar, one footnote leads to another. So there's that. The choice of which methods, I was very much helped by the Butlers on this. One of my operating principles was I didn't want this to be, any of the compositions to be so long that they couldn't be printed on a facing page spread. Because I believe that if you had to turn the page, you would begin to lose the thread, or the overall impression would be broken. And as you can imagine, many of these methods are much, much, much longer before they reach a repeat of the initial line. So that was one of the criteria that I used to select a method to apply. Others were, as it says in the intro to the book, I'm very interested in where I could find method names that seemed to either comment on or relate to in some way the line that was being permuted. So, for example, at the end, the last line is, the final line, as many of you know, I'm sure, from Dryden's famous Ode to St. Cecilia's Day, which is describing within sort of Neoplatonic Christian structures, the breakdown of the music of the spheres at the Last Judgment. And so I found a method called Bright Delight Minor, which to me, was a nice resonance, shall we say, for that line. So there are others like that. Not all of them are as, not all of the correspondences are as direct as that. And some of them are fairly arbitrary for other reasons. But those are some of the aspects that kept me entertained as I decided, well, what do I want to put in this thing? Yes, John.
What is the relationship, if there is a relationship, between the pipe organ and ringing? Did they develop in any kind of relationship with each other, with the pipe organ coming along later, and having this same ability of multiple sequences and permutation plus harmony? Is there some musical historical evolution in that?
That's a wonderful question. I'm not probably competent to answer it well. I believe the pipe organ actually predates the practice of change ringing. I'll defer to the Butlers on that point, but certainly there were church bells much before the practice of change ringing was developed. At least that's my understanding. But initially they were used just for tolling. Often a tower, and still in some places, only has one bell, for example. But the difference in a church tower, because of cost and other sort of factors, the number of bells is not the same in every church tower. And small churches may have a few bells. Great cathedrals like York Minster has more than the 10 we were hearing. So, like, if you think of it as that the keys on the keyboard vary from place to place. Most of the time, if there are 8 or a few more or a few less bells, they're tuned in a regular white note scale, diatonic scale on the piano. But if you don't have that many bells, it'll be, the intervals will be different. So, whereas with an organ, where the length of the pipes can be controlled, and most, if you have an organ, you can probably have a fair number of pipes. You can have a much larger number of intervals available to you, like most of the other instruments in the Western musical tradition. So I'm not sure that there's, I guess the point of convergence of mathematics between the two would simply be the ratios that Archimedes discovered between the length of the vibrating string or the vibrating pipe and the pitch that it generates. But you don't have nearly as many pitches available in some bell towers. So it's about the best I can do.
And I was also thinking about the idea of permutation, that obviously Bach, other masters of the organ for composition playing, are using permutation, mathematical permutation.
Oh, right, as a compositional method, yeah, sure. I don't think there's not an organized body, I think, of fixed mathematical relationships in those. I mean, there's a lot of theory about counterpoint and contrary motion and parallel motion and all those aspects. And Bach would do things like, as I'm sure you well know, fugues on the letters of his name and things like that. So he was a very mathematically aware composer. I don't think there's anything specific to the pipe organ, though, that defines that, and probably a lot of those compositions were originally written for the harpsichord or clavichord anyway.
A simple contextual question. Historically, is change ringing by tradition inherently festive and celebratory? After all, you can ring bells for funereal purposes, elegiac purposes. Is this inherently a celebratory form of art, ultimately?
I would defer to the butlers on that question. I think of it as a joyful noise most of the time. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah. But basically the bells themselves are there to signal something is happening in the church. Right. It's either the church clock striking the hour, because 300, 400 years ago, nobody could look at their wristwatch. It also signified what was going on in the village or town or wherever. There's a curfew bell, there's the obvious one, there's an Angelus bell, there's another obvious one. If anybody's ever read Dorothy Sayers' Nine Tailors, Significance of Death of Man, and you could tell from the number of rings how old that guy was, and so if you knew a 65-year-old, you knew it was probably Fred Bloggs down the road that had just died.
And famously, in World War II, the bells were silenced because they were going to be rung in case of an invasion. So the first ringing after the war was a very big deal.
On that note,
weddings are traditional, the most joyous reason for ringing, obviously.
Yes.
So this is kind of an observation part question. So I guess when I think of permutations and combinations, I go back to middle school math class and I think about the numbers. And then when you change that to diction, where the units of expression are now language, I think obviously there's now this level of interpretability, and we have these associations that come with when you hear the church bells, and so when there are performers in front of the language, it kind of takes this level of taking the content from the page to bodily performance expression. And so I'm wondering, if you could speak towards thinking about that change between the media of expression, in which it's almost like I'm looking at it as a puppeteering in the sense that there's this controlled aspect because it's coming from permutations, but there's still interpretability because humans are the form of expression. So,
well, as I said at the beginning, referring to Simon's Airfields of Lincolnshire, right? The idea of the poem can take many forms. I had thought it would be really boring to read the text in one voice, although perhaps some other people might not think so. So I and Sandra discussed the idea of doing a polyvocal reading so that you could continue the analogy of one human per word in the same way that one human rings a bell. So the human factor is there in the terms of the analogy, because those bells are not like a carillon played mechanically from a keyboard. They're individual people hauling on those ropes, right? So the movement of the performers up here tonight was a surprise to me. That was something that they added. I think it's wonderful. I suppose the way I would respond to it is it just adds another dimension. The reason I wanted to have a spoken version of it was because it's much harder to perceive the element of time when you're reading silently on a page. And especially if, when you look at the composition, what mostly strikes you are these rivers of color on the text, which is a wonderful way to apprehend the work, I think. But it draws your attention to the time sequence in a much stronger way, I think, to see or hear people speaking the words in different voices. So that's why it seemed to me like it was another form of the poem. And I'll share with you the third form that I've entertained and have not yet managed to instantiate, and I don't know if I will, we'll see, would be to do an animated version of the text, either as a gallery projection or something for your iDevice, in which the field of view would encompass maybe 5 lines high, and each word would appear one at a time at the same rate that the bell strokes would strike. Each word would fade out at the same rate that the sound decays, while those lines of text are scrolling up slowly off the screen so you can continue the composition. So then you would see movement, both the rivers of color and also a kind of wave-like difference in density of color, including black in the idea of color there, as the thing progressed. So it would be much more dance-like. So we'll see if I can make that happen someday. So those are the 3 forms that I thought the project could take. But I wanted to start with the book. Okay, well, you've been very patient. Thank you so much.
The
stars.
Heard. Beyond. Church bells.
Stars.
The
Heard.
beyond.
Stars.
Church bells.
Heard.
The
Beyond.
Stars.
Heard.
Church bells.
The
Beyond.
Stars.
Heard.
The
Church bells.
Stars.
Beyond.
Heard.
the
Church bells.
Stars.
Beyond.
Heard.
Church bells.
the
Stars.
Beyond. Church bells.
Heard.
the
Stars.
Church bells. Beyond.
the
Heard.
Church bells.
Stars.
the
Beyond.
Heard.
Church bells.
the
Stars.
Heard.
Beyond.
the
Church bells.
Heard.
Stars.
Beyond.
the
Heard.
Church bells. Beyond.
Stars.
the
Heard.
Beyond. Church bells.
Stars.
the
Heard.
Beyond.
Stars.
Church bells.
Heard.
the
Beyond.
Stars.
Church bells.
Heard.
the
Beyond. Church bells.
Stars.
Heard.
the
Church bells. beyond,
stars,
Heard.
church bells,
the,
stars,
beyond, church bells,
Heard.
stars,
the,
beyond, church bells,
stars,
Heard.
beyond,
the,
stars,
church bells, beyond,
Heard.
the,
stars,
beyond, church bells,
the,
Heard.
stars,
beyond,
the,
church bells,
Heard.
stars,
beyond,
the,
Heard.
church bells, beyond,
stars,
the,
Heard.
church bells, beyond,
stars,
the,
church bells,
Heard.
beyond,
stars.
church bells,
the.
Heard.